Yeah, in the name of the Father and of the Son, and then the kid goes, "I'm going to do it," dunks himself before he can even say Holy Ghost.
Welcome back to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. I'm your host, Daniel Fox, here with my great friend, Thomas Balsamo. How are you this morning, Tom?
Good.
Good.
I'm doing great.
Good. Well, if you're new to the podcast, we want to introduce you to this conversation between two close friends who are willing to listen to each other and hear just all these different thoughts, and we reason through things together. We're not just talking technical theology here. We're talking about life and all these various questions that come up, and how they connect to Scripture and to a biblical perspective of things. And so we look forward to your feedback about either what we're talking about, maybe a question that you have yourself, and it doesn't. Again, it doesn't have to be right on theology, but we want you to know that you can have friends that will listen and reason together about some things and not call you a heretic. So anyway,
or get angry at you for asking.
Yeah. Don't ask questions. Well, you need to look. I hope you're inquisitive and have questions. Our email address is reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. And once you get that typed in there, it can keep popping up for future questions and just be easy to contact us. So feel free to contact us at reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, and if you are interested in supporting what you hear, there is a way that you can do that, and that is over at patreon.com/reasontogether, patreon.com/reasontogether. We have a number of supporters on there that generously donate their money to help us pay our blog editor and technical editor and our actual audio editor and pay for the domain and hosting and all the things that are involved in keeping a content creation website going. And we do appreciate our patrons. And if you'd like to become one, there are some perks that you can have, various things. I'm not going to take time to go through them right now because I always do, but you can find that at patreon.com/reasontogether and just pick one of those tier levels there. And you can be a supporter of the show. And we would be very grateful to you.
Absolutely. And I want to draw your attention as well to the Reason Together blog. If you go to reasontogether.fm and you scroll down, you'll find our blog feature there. And we're putting out now about one a week, and we've asked a number of men also to contribute, and I really appreciate their help, especially in the early days of the blog, getting that going. And it's not we don't have these men just. It's not because we're party line that they believe exactly what we believe, but we believe that they're thinking men of a good spirit, and we can throw out these ideas and hopefully be a sharpening influence, challenge you to think, and so we welcome your feedback on that as well, and even just your interaction with the posts. Right there on the posts, I believe they can give feedback, right, Tom?
Yes,
they can put their comments on the thread. Our most recent article was one that I wrote on a fundamental misconception or misleading, which is having to do with our gospel presentation as, for lack of a better term, fundamentalists. And so you might look at that and and see what my issue was there. What part of the gospel I've kind of chosen to pick at. All right.
So am I to understand that this is a play on words, a fundamental misconception? So is there maybe a suggestion in the article? And I actually haven't read it yet. Is there a suggestion in the article that fundamentalism has maybe misconceived part of the gospel?
Absolutely. Yes, that's what it is. And
at the same time, the boat.
At the same time, it is fundamental as far as a ground level, because we're talking about the gospel, and you need to say it right.
Right.
So I mean, this is kind of a ground level issue, and yet it is something that's been very prevalent in our circles, which I don't think is maybe super accurately termed fundamentalism. But anyway, yeah. So it's play on words, and it's dealing with an issue that I almost say with 100% accuracy or confidence that everybody will know what I'm talking about. When they read it, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, well I've heard that. I've heard that for years."
Yep.
Everybody's heard that presentation. you
Yep.
know, it
I
just
kind
it's
of
kind of inescapable.
because I know you real well, and we've talked about this a lot, both on and off
Yeah,
the air. I kind of have a feeling where you're going with it,
yeah.
without you saying so. But from what you're saying, I want to go read it now. I'm excited to go read
Good,
it and see
good. Yeah.
see what's
Well,
there.
listeners, you can avail yourself of the blog as well, and just keep an eye on those things. Share them on Facebook.
Yeah,
That would help us out, and I trust help other people out as well. I
yeah.
have to give a little side note here. We before we jump into our questions for the day, uh, we are in Winter Olympic season now, and I just wanted to make a comment about the Winter Olympics. There is a lot of neat stuff. You have snowboarding, and you have all sorts of the kind of the variations of skiing, and the slalom and blah 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 blah. You have your figure skating, speed skating, but there's one of the competitions that has been difficult for me in some ways to accept, and it's fairly new to
Can
Winter Olympics.
can I guess?
You want to guess what it is?
Curling?
Curling, yes,
I knew it.
yes, yeah, and it's fairly new. I mean, maybe it's 300 years old as a sport, but in the Olympics, I think it's fairly new. And in the last Olympics or two, I recall seeing it, and I just had a hard time. And I'm going to balance this in a minute, but I had a hard time like seeing it as
A, s-
legitimate in a
a
certain way.
sport,
Yeah, because it was like Olympic bocce ball. That's sort of the way I saw it
right?
was, here, like, oh man, here we are rolling that ball towards the red, and I know it's a little bit different, but now to balance that, as I watch it, there obviously is skill to it.
Sure.
And in fact, the Italian team this year is whooping up on it. And from what I've seen so far, they're undefeated. And they weren't even favorites coming into it. They were just sort
Yeah.
of, oh, they're out there, and all of a sudden they're like 8-0. They're 8 wins to 0 losses, and they're just there's a 2-person team, a guy and a gal, and the gal is even more spot on than the guy. I mean, she just can do but it's really interesting to see. And so you can obviously see as they do it, it's a technique game.
Yeah. Sure.
It's like more akin to chess in the sense that it's strategic, it's technical, it's things like that. But there's that side of it that if you told, I mean, it would be one thing if you told somebody, I'm an Olympic snowboarder. They're like, whoa, you must be like a really good snowboarder. Like you're really good. But when you say, I'm an Olympic curler.
Yeah. Well, I think it's
So
because
like what skill have you picked up in life? Well, I kind of like slide on my knees across the ice, and then I scrub the floor.
right.
Just kind of like,
Well,
oh,
I think
okay.
it's because people expect an Olympic sport to be physically exerting.
Yeah, I mean that's it.
And yeah, and it's it doesn't, I mean, if for those not familiar with curling, it is kind of like bocce ball, right? I mean, I don't understand all the rules of it,
What?
but they're essentially
Yeah,
taking
kind
this
of.
very smooth stone with a handle on it, and
Yep.
they're on ice like in a hockey rink, and they're pushing it down the ice rink and letting it go until it slides down. And I don't even know what the goal is. I'm not really a huge Olympic watcher, but I've watched them do this
It
before. They
gets.
slide the
Yep.
stone, but to keep it going a certain way, there are guys that run in front of the stone, and they're sliding along the ice with brooms, and they're like scrubbing the floor really fast in front of this stone
It's like
to
this
make a
scrubbing
clear
thing.
path
Yeah.
for it. Yeah, and it's
Right.
almost comical watching someone scrub the floor like that. It just seems kind of comical looking,
which
but
which is I'm sure physically exerting. You know
sure,
what I mean?
to a
It'd be
point.
like if you tried to like scrub your kitchen floor in 30 seconds, you're like like this.
Yeah.
You really went at it. And as you watch it, it is really fascinating what they can do because they and I don't know if that's why they call it curling, but they kind of I think in some ways almost seems like get that ball to curl around or to curve around and get land into a certain circle, and then it can be
Huh.
knocked out by the opponents. And it is neat. It just was different as an Olympic sport. I
Yeah.
just but I'm
I
warming up to it.
yeah, I guess that is strange. Why do they call it curling? Maybe one of our listeners knows.
Yeah,
I'm not a huge Olympic watcher.
yeah.
I don't know if you are or not, but I mean, I've never really gotten into watching the Olympics, summer or winter. It's just never been a thing I was super interested in.
Hmm.
I've seen like clips here and there that kind of pop into the news or whatever, big achievements, but I don't know. I just never been that interested. And it's almost harder this year to want to watch anything Olympic related because it's in
Right.
China.
Where it's at.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and apparently I'm not the only one who thinks that way. The ratings for the Olympics have been like the worst they've ever been.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so yeah,
Which I can, sympathize with the whole political approach to it to some
sure.
degree. And yet
Yeah,
these people have been training for years. That's not up to them where it's at, you know. I
right.
mean, and, you know,
Right.
they only get a few times in life to have this opportunity. And
Mm,
so, yeah, it's interesting. But okay, there you go. There's my thoughts on the Olympic sport of curling.
all right.
So, where do we want to start with our questions today?
All right, I want to get right into this one here first, and this we don't have to take super long on this one. I think it's more funny than anything, but it is a valid question, and this one is
Okay.
from one of our patrons, Matthew.
Hmm.
He says, "I recently came across this video, um, and after I finished dying laughing, it got me thinking about something. Why do we have to have someone else baptize us?" Now, for context, we'll put this link in the show notes.
Yeah.
But he sends us this video of this young boy who's getting baptized, and the pastor is standing over the boy, speaking to the congregation, and he's kind of talking a little slower, and he's giving some context to why the boy's being baptized, and the boy just gets impatient, and he just goes, "I'm going to do it," and he pinches his nose, and he dunks himself before the pastor is done talking. He
Yeah,
pops
and
up
the
out of the
pastors.
water, triumphantly waving his hands in the air, and then rushes out of the baptismal tank. And everyone died laughing. And it was a funny video. It was
It
very
was
funny.
because the
But
pastor was actually in his spiel, like he was about to dunk the kid, and the kid
yep.
just grabs his nose and dunks himself.
Yeah. In the name of the Father and of the Son. And then the kid goes, "I'm going to do it," dunks himself before he could even say Holy Ghost. Um, But it does bring up a valid point. So Matthew asks this: as I understand baptism to be a step of obedience as well as an outward show of following Jesus, why can't the person just invite all the people and then dunk himself? I know whenever baptism is performed in the Bible, it is always a saved individual baptizing a newly saved individual, but I do not know of any passages that explain why. I can think of one, but we'll get to that in a minute. He says, "Is it to give credibility to that person's testimony of salvation? For a practical example, if an African villager receives a Bible, reads it, and gets saved on his own, and then realizes he needs to be baptized, but the missionary is no longer around, can he invite a bunch of people and baptize himself?" It's a good question.
Yeah.
What do you,
All
what do you,
right.
do you want to go first?
Sure. My first thoughts are just like on a just pretty simple level. But why does someone else have to baptize him? And I would say that just has to do with the biblical model and the biblical mandate.
Hmm.
When you look in Scripture, people are baptized by other people.
Hmm.
The disciples baptized on the day of Pentecost, or Philip baptized the Ethiopian eunuch. I know it's not exactly the same, but John the Baptist baptizing people with the baptism of repentance. It's always done by someone else.
Hmm.
And you say, well, that's just the model, but the mandate is, when you think of the Great Commission, go ye therefore into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Ghost. So the part of the command actually is making disciples, baptize them,
Hmm.
be baptizing the
Yeah,
disciples. It's said to you as the person you're making the disciple, then you baptize them.
man, you took my
Did I
answer.
just steal your answer?
You stole my thunder.
Sorry.
You took the wind out of my sails. I'm like all deflated now, and sad and depressed, and
So
full of
we need to go.
anxiety.
And now for a message from our sponsors. Oh wait, we don't have sponsors. It's our patrons. Okay, so we got to keep going. Keep together, Tom.
I'm working on it. Let me wipe my tears here 1 second. Okay. All right. No, you do have a point. And that was a similar point that I was going to make is Matthew 28:19-20, the Great Commission, very well-known passage. Jesus is speaking to people he is commissioning, right?
Yes.
He's giving them authority to do something to someone else. And he says, go ye, therefore. So this is just simple language that I'm making the argument from, is go ye, therefore. He's speaking to them. You are who I'm commissioning. And then he says, baptize them in the name of the
Good.
Father.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Right.
those who are commissioned to baptize are baptizing those who are not yet commissioned to baptize. But the idea is that someone is commissioned to do something to someone else,
Good.
just
Hmm.
based on the language alone. So that's the passage I was thinking of, but you stole it.
But you added a good clarification. I appreciate that.
I'm still mad at you though.
No, you're not. So anyway, Matthew, there you go.
Yeah.
That's our thought on it. You can come up with these scenarios, and I get the question saying, well, what if there's nobody there to baptize him? Can he baptize himself? I recall, and I don't think it's quite apples to apples here, but do you remember a long time ago we talked about the Lord's Supper
Yes.
and the availability of grape juice?
Yes.
Like, well, what if you're in a
Mhm.
country where, it would ferment, and so they have to use Kool-Aid or whatever, can they do that? And anyway, it's kind of similar in
Yeah.
that way that there's a biblical pattern to it, and I
Yeah.
think we need to stick to that.
Speaking of that, can I take a tangent on that for a second? Because there was
Sure.
something that we never talked about with that episode, because it actually came up later. So someone asked me, they basically have like a food allergy or some sort of intolerance
Mhm.
to certain things, and partaking in the Lord's Supper would flare up their allergic response.
Mhm.
So in a case like that, the question was posed to me: do I bring my own materials for this and just partake at the same time as everyone else with different materials, or do I just not partake? And my guidance on that in the moment was, it's probably better to just not partake. um, I mean, you're here; the Lord knows you want to, and you're doing solemn introspection. You're being obedient and observing the ordinance, and so on. But you have an allergy to this thing,
Mhm. Mhm.
I didn't want necessarily the idea of bringing your own materials to that. I feel like in some way that would, even if it could be done in a tasteful way or tactful way, it seems like it would, um, not profane the ordinance, but in a sense reduce it.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I off track there?
No, not necessarily. I would have to do a little thinking on that because, like you say, if it's done in a tasteful way, my bigger concern is actually the elements themselves.
Right.
If somebody said, I'm allergic to grape juice, and so I'm just going to bring some grape Kool-Aid, or I'm going to bring some, mango juice. I'm going to bring some mango juice and a piece of coconut. You know
Grape
what I
soda.
mean? And I would personally be like, no, no. But if somebody said, well, I will make my own unleavened bread out of almond flour and blah blah blah, and okay, I don't know that I could technically say no. You can't have an unleavened bread of a different
Yeah.
substance than what I buy over the internet or something like that.
Right. Sure.
Um, but now the juice, to me, I would still be a stickler on that too. Like, well, no, it's bread and juice. I mean, that's what it is. And so I would
Yeah.
totally agree with you to say, look, the Lord knows. And I think um, I think there are things like that. And this may come up in another episode. My wife and I were just talking recently about an interesting passage that she read that really kind of seems to give you an opening into the heart of God. And sometimes we're so rigid on certain particulars. Where was I going with that thought? To say, oh no, 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 I don't care if you're allergic or not. You're gonna take the element. No, and it's to be like,
Meanwhile,
you
someone's
you go,
lips are 3 times the size, and, you know,
yeah,
bless
yeah,
God you obeyed. Meanwhile, they're having anaphylaxis and heading to the hospital. And
yeah. That's what I was like. You're going in anaphylactic shock, and like pulling out the EpiPen or what, and like, you take it. Look, does the Lord know that? Does the Lord know the constitution of your body better than you
sure.
do
Yeah.
before you did? Does he understand the heart of the matter? Sure. And in fact, I
Mhm.
actually think there's a passage that would speak very much to that, and I will look that up and bring it to bear next time.
Okay.
But yeah,
Well,
on that issue, is there a little variability? I guess I'm more saying, well, maybe in the bread. I guess if you were really allergic to the
I mean,
bread,
yeah,
but
I don't know. I don't want to make it about the elements necessarily. To me,
yeah,
it's a matter of the spirit versus the letter of the law.
hmm hmm
Of the New Testament church, there are only two ordinances. There's not a ton of ordinances. There's just these two,
yeah, yeah,
baptism and the Lord's Supper. And I think when someone really has a heart of obedience and they're participating in the ordinance, and I hate using the phrase, but it makes sense, in spirit, right?
uh-huh.
They're participating in the spirit of the ordinance. They're there to obey it if they could. They're there to make sure their heart is in communion with the Lord. So they're examining themselves first, and they're confessing and forsaking known sin. They're restoring fellowship with the Lord as needed, and they're participating in the spirit of the thing. And if they have an allergy, I wouldn't say there's any requirement for them to take it. But for me personally, I think bringing in something else, while technically you could say there's nothing wrong with that, I don't know that I would want it done in my church. It just feels like, in a way, it might diminish the sacredness of the ordinance.
Yeah, and I think there was a difference because I'm thinking as you're talking, like, okay, well, if you open the door to not participate, but do it in spirit, can you are we opening the door to participate in a different way, but in spirit? Well, I think there's a difference between abstaining, especially for a health reason, of course, that's what we're
Hmm.
talking about, abstaining and substituting.
Hmm.
Substitution seems to profane essentially that, well, I can kind of make it what I want to, for that matter,
Right.
I'll make it a peanut butter and jelly, but I still love the Lord. And well, and we've talked about this before, probably in the past with Jeroboam. That was the great sin of Jeroboam, was he essentially created a substitute worship.
Yep.
And you're used to going down there, just go here. You're used to worshiping this way, worship this way. It's very similar, but it's different.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of that going on in even evangelicalism today. There's been, if you will, substitutions, which have majorly led to profaning worship. And yet they'll still say, but my heart's in the right place,
Yeah.
as if that sort of scrubs everything. So I
Yeah.
agree with you that you have to be careful not to profane
Sure.
the ordinancer.
Good. Good. I know that's kind of a tangent, but nevertheless, helpful to think through.
Yeah.
This next one is one I've had on the list for quite a while that I wanted to deal with. And this is the idea of pet ownership and evolutionary worldviews.
hmm
Okay.
hmm
And the question is basically, if I can preface it this way, and maybe just give like a quick, your first instinctive answer. Can someone adopt a worldview different from the scriptural worldview without really intending to?
They certainly be influenced by one.
Okay.
Yes. I mean,
Influence.
yeah.
That's the word I was hoping you'd say. Is that people who have a Christian worldview, if they're not careful, can be influenced by an evolutionary worldview without
hmm
really intending to. And I think it becomes apparent in certain ways. And one of the ways that it does seem to become apparent sometimes is pet ownership. Now,
Uh-huh.
before
Oh yeah.
everybody writes me an angry email,
Yeah.
okay,
Oh boy, you're treading on some.
I'm treading on
You're
thin ice. I am not against pet ownership. I am against it for me right now at this point in my life. Um, I figure, why should why should animals have the right to live in my house? I mean, they, why should I be cleaning up after this thing, right? In
Right.
in my home, I feel like God has made human beings to learn and to grow and become sophisticated and have dominion over the earth, and then I'm going to take this animal and bring it into my house and let it, make disappointing things all over my carpet. No, thank you. But so I have nothing wrong with pet ownership. I just don't want any pets at this point in my life. Maybe someday in the future I might, but right now I don't. Um, but I live in a part of the country where I have observed more dedicated pet ownership here than in anywhere else I've ever lived. And I wonder, what is the correlation? Is there a correlation? So I've lived in the Midwest for a good portion of my life, and people own pets, but it seems different, right?
Hmm.
Number one, it doesn't seem as prevalent. Number two, when they do own pets, it's a lot of times for utilitarian reasons. So the pet will live outside, like a dog for security, or a cat to deal with mice or whatever. So it's a lot more utilitarian. Um, but here, pet ownership is almost like a fashion accessory, or like an additional child in the family. And I wonder, okay, is there a correlation between the worldview of the Northeast, right, which is predominantly secular, and pet ownership? And I think there is a correlation. Whether or not there's causation, I can't prove, but I think there's a correlation. So, like I said, there's nothing wrong with pet ownership, but when people love pets so much that they treat them almost with this reverent loyalty to the pet, where they're spending thousands of dollars a year for its maintenance and its
Right.
health
Right.
care, and
Yep.
they treat the pet like another member of the family, even so much as calling it a child. There's
Hmm.
just a lot
Hmm.
of that seems to happen around here. And I wonder if evolutionary biology has been an influence to even Christians in this part of the country without us really thinking about it much. And I think there's two ways where it tends to happen. Is the idea of animal equality with human beings, right? That is a secular humanist idea. That is an evolutionary biology idea, that we are animals. We're just a more intelligent form of animal.
Hmm.
So we should treat animals with the respect that we would give to a human being, because human beings are animals in the evolutionary mindset. And it's like, I wonder if that has rubbed off even on Christians in this culture, where there's almost this undying loyalty to a pet. Now, I don't want to deny the truth that there could be an emotional attachment to a pet.
Well, yeah, sure.
And I'm not even going to say that that's wrong.
No.
Okay. If someone's emotionally attached to a pet, I can understand that. I can't even say that I would be immune to that. I could see myself becoming emotionally attached to a pet that you've had a long time. That's fine. I see nothing wrong with that. But
Hmm.
it's the degree to which we change how we live for the sake of that emotional attachment. That to
Hmm.
me is where it becomes kind of a problem. So, like, as a man, I have a responsibility to be a good steward of my money. I have a responsibility to provide for
Right.
my family. I have a responsibility to budget my time. And if I love a pet so much that it's consuming thousands of my dollars per year and it's taking up hours and hours of my time, my family has to change the way that they live to care for an animal that maybe has health problems or whatever. That just, it makes me wonder, when is it too much? When is it too much? When do you just have to do what needs to be done, right? And and let nature take its course with the beast, right? Um,
Right.
and I'm probably making some people mad by saying that, but it makes me wonder if there's a mindset, a worldview from the world that has kind of infiltrated into our thinking when it comes to pets. And the other thing was the elevation of emotional comfort. So the first thing was animal equality with human beings. That comes from the evolutionary biological mindset. But the second thing is prioritizing emotional comfort. So, like, that is
Mm-hmm.
also a secularist view, that my emotional comfort is my identity. So I have to do everything I can to protect it.
Hmm.
Right. So,
Interesting.
so if I have emotions that are attached to this pet, and this pet gets cancer, or gets some other health problem, right? I need to pay all this money, all this time, so that my emotional comfort can be protected, because I don't want to lose this pet, or I don't want my children to lose this pet. What I'm doing is I am prioritizing emotional comfort instead of learning to deal with emotional issues,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is a secularist mindset. So I wonder if in these two ways, an evolutionary worldview has kind of been adopted almost without knowing it by Christians who don't just simply like pets, but love them with this undying love as if they're a member of the family. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, largely that was some good thoughts you had there, and we had talked before you were debating on how to term that, whether it was like like pets and humanism or pets
Yeah.
and the evolutionary biology. But as you're talking, yes, there is an evolutionary component to that thinking. Um, though honestly, I actually, as I'm listening to it, I really would classify it more under humanism,
Really?
because a large part of that is, if I could say, there's sure a vast swath of Christians who have pets, not a problem, but who probably don't have a proper or an accurate biblical perspective of their pet. And it's not because necessarily they see, I don't, and to any degree that they accept evolution, is partly because they've just put themselves, they've been ignorant on, or remained ignorant of, any biblical view of animals, or of themselves, or of their role or priorities as believers. Like you said, stewardship and time management,
Yeah.
and those different things. And to the degree that they're ignorant of the biblical model, or the biblical mindset, they are in some ways humanistic in saying, whatever way I see as best is best. Whether that's, and obviously that's influenced maybe in some ways, or at least it looks like, it has an appearance of having an evolutionary mindset.
Hmm.
It's basically humanistic in that I'm saying, in that I'm the one that determines. I am the one that determines what is the right way to handle this pet. And I
Yeah.
agree with you that a lot of people have, they need to tweak, at the very least, tweak their perspective and understand, what does the Bible say about animals. They are less than human, number
Hmm.
one. Um, and number two, the righteous man regardeth the life of his beast. So you have
I
to
was gonna
couple those.
I was gonna
Say,
say, someone right now listening to me explain all of that a moment ago is probably right now typing in Proverbs 12:10, and sending me an email. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast. Yeah,
right,
I'm not suggesting that we be cruel to animals.
right.
I'm not
Obviously
suggesting
not.
that.
And that, when you say, there's emotional attachment, sure. When I was young, when I was 9 years old, we moved out to the country and kind of jumped into the country life, and had, over the years, we kind of said everything but pigs, I think, or maybe it was everything but pigs and goats. Um, a few sheep, a few horses, cows, different things. Um, but anyway, so we had rabbits at one point. Rabbits, they're living out in the barn. That didn't keep my sister from being emotionally attached to them,
Mhm.
you know. Or we had two sheep, and at one point, and I got to name one, and my sister got to name one. And so I just sort of called it what it looked like, so I looked at this lamb and said, well, what am I going to name this one? Um, and so but see, by my sister, she kind of went at it from the Anne of Green Gables approach. So she had this very flowery name for her lamb, and her lamb was Cordelia. And I just sort of looked at it like, well, it is what it is. And so mine was named Fat Face. And so we had Cordelia and Fat Face. Um, you know, but what I'm saying is that it didn't have to be in the house for her to be emotionally attached to it.
Sure.
There is a natural emotional attachment to this, what is an intricate and beautiful creation of God that is, it's fascinating, and it's made, I think, in some ways to bring pleasure. Yeah, it's utilitarian, but God is, God has made these masterpieces,
Yeah.
and there's something to be valued and appreciated, even loved, we might say, in some ways. So I don't see the problem with the attachment, but where we get off is where we then begin to blur the lines, as to this thing's role, and its actual value.
Yeah.
It is still an animal, and it is, made for a certain purpose. And so I have to really ask myself the serious question: how much of God's money, that He's permitting me to steward,
Yeah.
does He want me to funnel into the care of this thing that I brought into my home out of its, in some ways, natural habitat? I've rearranged its habitat, like you say. Now this thing that would just live its life outdoors, now I have to scoop after, or I have to do this and that, and now I have to maintain its quality of life, and I have to give it food since it has no place to hunt. And so I'm changing its whole thing, and now I'm dumping money into it, and then it begins to
Yeah.
develop health
W
problems.
well,
yeah. So I think we have to get a biblical perspective of
Sure.
what do we got to do here.
Well, I mean, Proverbs 12:10 is dealing with a beast of burden. That's not talking about a pet that you own for fun or for emotional reasons. Um, Basically, the righteous man takes care of his beast. When it works hard, he lets it eat. He gives it water. He takes care of it. Whereas
Right.
the
Right.
wicked man was just cruel to the thing. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
That's talking about beasts
Good.
of burden.
Good.
But like a good, I was thinking, a good example of this. Let's say you're getting ready to go to church, right? And your dog gets out and runs away, and you have no idea where it is, right? Do you skip church to find the dog, or do you just say, "Sorry, dog, you're on your own. I've got a priority here." Um, for me, I'm sorry, dog. You're going to spend the night out in the cold. I mean, you chose your bed. You got to lie down in it now. I've got a priority here. There are expectations of me. I'm not going to sacrifice something that's a higher priority for the dog, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and we just went through this here in the last year with a pet at home. Um, I'm not necessarily pet averse. I'm
mhm,
just lazy, probably when it comes to pets. So I know that I don't really want to take something out for a walk twice a day in the middle of winter. I don't want to do it. I just would rather stay inside.
yep.
So for that reason, I might like a dog, but I don't want to, but we kind of thought what when the kids get old enough and they want to take care of it, it would provide some joy there, whatever. So we ended up years back, we got two cats.
Hmm.
And as typically happens, they got older, and they so the one is obviously began to develop his health problem. I mean, health problems where it was just evidencing some problem, and probably related to age. And we had to start going through this thing of saying, well, what do we do? Okay, well, so we got like this first test done. Well, we think he might be diabetic, and well, what does that mean? Well, first you might have to change his diet, and eventually you might have to go to insulin shots and whatever. Well, then what? How much is that going to cost? We kind of had known that we'll buy food and litter, but at a certain point, when it's starting to ruin your own physical things by what it's doing, and
Hmm.
then it's taking an inordinate amount of money and all these things to try to preserve this life, and I have to ask, well, for what? I
Right.
mean, it is an animal.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about a baby, because that is a human being made in the image of God with a
Hmm.
soul. This is an animal. And so at what point then can I just say, you know what? I can let this go, and I'll do it humanely. I can even pay to have it, what do they call it? Essentially euthanized in a calm way that I think is actually kind to the animal. But you have to make those hard decisions. Does
Hmm.
it pull on the emotions? Sure. Do you
Hmm.
want to try to make it comfortable? Yeah, but then, like you said, ask yourself, why am I doing that? Am I making it comfortable so that I'm comfortable, so that
Right.
I feel like I'm well? Again, um, what's the word I'm looking for? What do they do to a gyroscope? They I'm looking for a specific word. Calibrate. You have to
Okay.
calibrate your thinking to biblical teaching. And
Yeah.
I'm a steward, and this is an animal, and what role does it play, and how high does my comfort, and what is my real motivation, and how is this helping, and how is this
Yeah.
detracting, and things like that. So
Yeah.
it
And I.
has a role, but boy, they can become, I see what you're saying, they can become so important. And I've seen that more as I've had to go to the vet,
Hmm.
or you start to watch out more, like they have this service for dogs, and they have this available for dogs, or for animals, and
Hmm.
now there's someone who will do this, and you're like, really? Wow, it kind of sounds like it's a
Yeah.
human,
And
and you're like, whoa, buddy.
I suppose if you had like if money was no object and you had just unlimited disposable income and you wanted to take care of your pet like, in different ways just cuz the pet is your hobby, fine, I have no problem with that. But, it's especially bad if you don't have that kind of disposable income or you have debt and now you've got this animal that you're spending, thousands of dollars on per year. It just seems to me like unwise, and it's all for the sake of
Hmm.
emotional comfort and a secular humanist mindset has infiltrated by that point. Yeah, so I'm not saying
Yeah,
all
that's an
pet
interesting.
owners are humanists. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it can get to that point, especially if someone has spent a
Yeah,
lot of their time with their mind in the world. It certainly can rub
yeah.
off.
Well, and that's an
Um,
interesting point that you make right at the end there is not, I've been focusing kind of on the animal and the biblical view of the animal. And you're also bringing into play um, the personal comfort aspect of
mhm.
me, revolving a lot of choices around my personal comfort and desires and happiness. Wow, we got to really watch out for that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good.
One more question I think we have time for.
Okay.
Did you want
Yep.
to pick one, or I kind of have one in mind here?
Go ahead. Nope, you go
Okay.
ahead.
This one is from a listener named David, and he says, "What are your thoughts on the origin and practice of deputation for missions? How do you think this was handled in the early church? I know Paul made tents, but there are other examples, but are there other examples?" That's a question. And along similar lines, how do you feel about the organizations that tend to focus more on raising your support from individuals as opposed to churches? I feel like this is a newer practice, and I'm not sure what to think of it. Interested in your thoughts.
Well, this is going to be good because we haven't had much time to think over this. So this is going to be an example of a conversation between friends as they're bouncing thoughts off. It's not like we've prepared this 3-page
Yeah,
essay in advance and have all this.
yeah.
You're going to hear us kind of reasoning through it, not having all the thoughts or all the details
Well,
necessarily hashed out. And again, share your thoughts on it too. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I have been on deputation.
Yeah, right.
I
Yes, that's
spent
true.
2 years on deputation, and I don't know of the origins of it. To me, it seems like it's probably
Right.
not
Nor
one
do
of
I.
those. It's probably not one of those things you can put an exact uh, origin date or time or year on this. It probably happened organically over church history. Um, but
Well, can I insert a thought there?
sure,
Honestly, I think that just from the very limited knowledge that I have here, was it? Am I thinking? Yeah, William Carey. Um, kind of what's it? The first Baptist missionary. Am I remembering that correctly? Um,
possibly.
it almost seemed that the seeds of deputation were essentially there because, and I guess I say that because I don't remember his counterpart's name, who basically said, "You go and I'll hold the ropes." Well, okay, you have to go. You have to be supported somehow, and there's probably a few of us anyway
Yeah,
on this side of the ocean who will help to support you. Well, that's the basic idea: is
sure.
finding people who are going to help support that work.
Well, and that's why I say it depends on how you're defining deputation. Do you mean multiple
Yeah,
churches supporting a missionary? If
yeah.
that's what you mean by deputation, then obviously it existed long before William Carey. But the idea of modern deputation, in which the missionary must travel to all of these churches to garner support, that seems like a newer invention. And there are quite a few problems with the system, but yet it's one of those situations where we don't really have another option. No one yet has discerned a better option, despite all of the technology that we have today and the ability to get to know people remotely. We still have to have missionaries spending thousands of dollars on gas and vehicle maintenance and years of their life traveling to places to garner support. Um, it's definitely got some flaws, and could use some changes. But trying
And
to reinvent the wheel at this point, especially with Baptists, is yeah, not gonna
yeah,
happen.
now I would I'd also say it probably has its strengths. And my initial thought is, and again, we're speaking not necessarily real deep here, but my initial thought is that it is a method. God does care how we do what we do, and yet it doesn't necessarily, the scripture doesn't necessarily lay out how to do all of what we
Mm-mm.
do. So to say that sometimes we as humans do develop methods for what we do. Um, and God, I believe, does care about those methods and whether they're in line with wisdom and with His overall design. But say, for instance, how one person prepares a message to somebody else, or how one person chops wood to somebody else. Okay, there are principles of wisdom involved there, but not necessarily an exact scriptural mandate.
Mhm.
So when we go to deputation, that is a means to an end. It's a method of how we get it done. It's not it's not, doesn't have to be the only one. And it
Right.
doesn't, as we're navigating through the method, we're recognizing, that's kind of that's a drawback of that method. And yet there's some strengths of that method. And we can kind
Sure.
of debate through those. It
Well,
doesn't have to be that it is the biblical method or it is anti-biblical. It
yeah,
is a method.
there
And
really
we just have to
isn't
analyze, is it wise or not?
there really isn't a good biblical example of anything like it, really. And you can't point to the
Mhm.
life of the Apostle Paul. There were some differences in how he was supported versus how missionaries get support today. In that he was able to work wherever he went, and today missionaries are not able to do that legally in a lot of places.
Le- right, right.
But
That
the
is.
other side of it too is, yeah, the places that often helped Paul financially were places where he had been and he did know those people, so he was there face to face with them. But then you have other
Good point.
instances in which an offering was collected for the church in Jerusalem by all of these other churches that participated in this, and they'd never met the people in Jerusalem face to face at all. So I mean, does the support of someone always have to include a face-to-face meeting? No, I don't think it does. And I have seen it happen in the deputation world, where churches will take a missionary on for support, sight unseen, based on the
Hmm. Hmm.
recommendations of trusted people that they know.
Hmm.
And I think that's fantastic. I think that's great. If
Yeah.
someone has a recommendation or a reference like that, I think that's great. That saves the missionary a lot of time and a lot of money. But we're kind of locked into this system where we have to meet them face to face all the time, and hear them preach and all these other things. And it's like, is that really necessary? Not in every case. No, I don't think it is. Um, so,
Yeah, not absolutely necessary. If as far as to go to the question before I add some other thoughts, raising support from individuals as opposed to churches. What's your thought on that, Tom? I mean, we talk about the church being God's organization in the New Testament
yeah.
age, and I have a thought on that I want to kind of question.
Well,
But what's your
I
take?
mean, first off, I have a hard time thinking, how would you stop that? You know, if if I as a free individual want to give some of my money to a missionary that I know, and the church that I'm a member of doesn't support him, can I send money to his missions agency for his support? I honestly don't see a problem with that. Or his clearinghouse, whoever's taking care of his finances. I don't see a problem with supporting him. That way, a reason why a lot of people give through the church these days is because of the tax benefits of it and so on. But yeah, I don't have an
Does
issue with individuals supporting missionaries.
Okay, let me ask this. Do you think that part of the reason, do you think there's a case to be made for encouraging people to support missions through their church, so as to be kind of in sync, mentally with their church, that yes, this is our ministry, um, and that these are ones that we as a church corporately have vetted, we have chosen, at least our style of
Sure.
government here says that missionary recommendations rise from the people. They make the recommendations when we open a unit of support, because we don't do the faith promise aspect, which I'm just going to put a slight touch in here to say that the passages that are probably used to preach faith promise aren't really good passages to
Hmm.
validate faith promise.
That's correct.
Um, but when we open a unit of support in our budget, and we say this is just a part of our budget that we support, world missions, and we have a unit opened up now, we would like to take recommendations from the people that have presented their work here. You've seen the people, you've had the opportunity to talk with them, to consider their burden. Here's the Right now, in fact, that process is open at our church right now, and I think there's half a dozen. Okay, you have 6 people. Recommend, a couple that you feel like, this is who I believe God would want us to partner with. Then we will take it into the deacons meeting, and we'll take it by the one that was voted on the most. Okay, so the one
Hmm.
that gets the most votes, has the most people saying, I think that's the one we need to partner with. Then we act on that nomination amongst the deacons and the pastors. Is there anything to disqualify that person? If not, if it's a yes vote there, it goes back to the people to ratify. But
Hmm.
what I'm saying is it arises from the people, and yet it's a corporate process, so that in the end, we as a body, we as a church family have decided this is, if you will, our missionary.
Yeah.
Where if someone else just says, yeah, well, I want to support this guy over here, not saying they can't, but is it wise and advisable to kind of point them to say, but this is the missions program of your church?
Yeah.
Um, what do you
Well,
think?
I don't, I mean, there's a difference between being out of sync and doing something extra.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So if you're still
Fair. Yep.
supporting the church missionary that the church has voted on, I don't think you're out of sync. And if you want to do something extra for a missionary that the church has not taken on, maybe they don't have a second unit, but you have a little bit extra that you'd like to give. I have no problem with that because you're not out of sync with the church. You're just doing something extra. I think it's a different story where you're like, the church has voted on a particular missionary, and you're like, I will not support that missionary. I want to support this one instead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe for certain reasons, the church particularly voted that other one down or did not choose that one. And I think there
Mm-hmm.
you can become out of sync that way with your local church. But yeah,
Yeah, and I don't think from a pastor's perspective we can always know why a person would do that. Not to mention their personal finances really aren't our business.
yeah,
So I wouldn't know if they were, and so I can see wanting to say, oh wow, I appreciate that ministry, and to be honest, a church can't take on every good missionary.
no,
We don't have that financial capacity. So you as an individual may see several other missionaries that you feel like these are godly people, and I would love, even if it's by a one-time gift. I see this missionary. Wow, he's doing a good work. I would walk up. Maybe you think I would walk up and give him $100 bill. Well, okay,
yeah,
great. Be a blessing.
yeah,
Um, and so I can understand that aspect of it, and yet there may be some people that feel like, well, are going to express resistance to the, if you will, the church program
yeah,
by kind of diverting their money here or there so as not to exactly,
sure. Well,
uh,
I think
you know,
I think it's kind of one of those things where, the whole modern deputation idea and the whole modern missions support idea of supporting many missionaries for small amounts of money comes
mm,
from this idea that, taking the Great Commission to literally mean one church must go into all the world. That's physically impossible. No matter how many missionaries you take on, you will never reach the whole world as one church. You can't do it. You just can't do it. I have to wonder if maybe if we wouldn't have gone that way in church history, if instead churches would have said, okay, instead of us focusing on, spending all this money on massive fancy buildings and big programs and stuff, let's use the money we've raised to take on an additional pastoral staff member and send them out fully supported and have them start a church somewhere. And then one church then is responsible for the support of that one missionary. And now you say, well, that's not reaching the whole world. Well, that's not true. That's just not true. You can't put the entire burden of the Great Commission on one church. Um, but
right, right.
yeah, so I mean, in a sense, you could
One
eliminate.
local church, and
r-
that's where people kind of get confused if they don't see a world aspect to the church at large versus a local body.
Right, right, and that's a whole nother discussion. But, um, but yeah, I mean, that in a sense would eliminate the entire process of deputation. It would enable you to raise someone up in your own midst that you can trust, that you have personally vetted, that you've personally trained, eliminating all of the headaches of having to drop missionaries that you eventually find out didn't do what they were supposed to do. Um, Maybe not eliminating it, but at least mitigating that. It would save a lot of time, a lot of resources. If churches had done things that way generations ago, as opposed to the deputation system evolving to be what it is. Um,
Mm.
it seems like that would have been maybe even better quality as well. But
Good. It would be fun. I'm just thinking it would be fun to make a graph of strengths and weaknesses of the deputation system.
mhm,
We could say, well, there's this weakness, or somebody can, it kind of devolves into a typical format. You show a video, you say, we've been
mhm,
here, you tell them the population and the great need, you answer a few questions about the culture, and then you leave, and they don't know any more about you than they knew about
yep,
anybody else.
that's right.
You know, the flip side of that, is that it makes a missionary convey his burden to churches.
Hmm.
He doesn't just say, I want to go into missions, and then say, as in the Southern Baptist system, the downfall of that is that the local church may never see the missionary because the cooperative program says, yep, boom, you're fully supported. And these churches, go on for years and never actually see a real live missionary.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, there's pros and
Well, I mean,
cons here and there. It'd be fun to make a graph and have
yeah.
even our listeners or our
And
patrons
sure,
contribute
and
to it.
before the age of technology, that maybe would have been different. But I mean, now people can Skype call or FaceTime or Zoom or whatever. There's so many ways that people can communicate with a missionary on a personal level, like never
Yeah. Oh
before.
yeah.
So, I think there could be some valuable changes to the deputation system with that. But, again, that'd be reinventing the wheel, and many have tried it, and so far no one has succeeded.
One thought before we close, I know we're getting a little late here, is he asked the question, how do you feel about the organizations that tend to, and here's the key word, focus more on raising your support from individuals? Is that wise that for organizations to focus on individual support instead of church support?
I'm not aware of these organizations. Maybe they've cropped up in the years since I did deputation, but um, I don't know. I guess I've thought about it before. Maybe something like a GoFundMe or something like that, but for missionaries. Maybe
Uh-huh.
maybe something like that has cropped up that I don't know about. But that's what comes to mind. And,
Hmm.
people raise a lot of money with GoFundMe type things. But again, that seems to focus on taking it completely out of the local church setting, which troubles me a little bit. Um, while I can't say it's inherently wrong for individuals to support a missionary, even with an online platform, that almost seems to take too much of it out of the hands of the church.
I agree. I'd say it's a little concerning to focus on individuals outside of the umbrella of their local body and that kind of corporate work together. Again, not to say that somebody can't support a missionary in some way individually, but to try to focus and draw people to missionaries outside of the, if you will, the influence or the approval of their local church, I think that could be problematic.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we need to get going here, but we want to thank again our listeners, especially our patrons who support this endeavor here. If you have any thoughts, please send them our way. reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. Take a look at our blog and the recent submissions there, and keep your eye on that.
All right. Well, thank you again for listening to this episode, and hopefully it was helpful to you. And we do appreciate all of you. Again, we are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.